might be quite nice to talk a little bit about the underpinning rationale for what we do and why we do it, because it's quite important for us as today we understand a little bit more about the neurology and physiology of music and singing, and we understand a little bit more about conditions that are common and that people might encounter as they get older. All of us might encounter as we get older. And we're involved in, with Canterbury Cantata Trust and Music for Wellbeing with, I don't like to call it training, I like to call it sharing practice and ideas with other practitioners. So I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about that because we can relate it to the exercises that Gren did earlier and as it's fresh in our minds. So we run training courses, sharing courses for people who often are already doing this work, but not necessarily in working with people with specific health conditions. Some people are completely new to it, and they come from lots of different backgrounds, sometimes health backgrounds, speech and language therapists. We have one of our practitioners here, this is Jenny, who is a speech and language therapist, and that's really helpful to have this sort of interdisciplinary approach to what we do. We have physiotherapists and occupational therapists. We have a social worker, so people coming from different allied health professions. My own background is in nursing, and with specialising in long-term conditions. So we've sort of drawn together all of these strands. So we're looking at this from a neurological perspective, a physiological perspective, like what happens downstream, what happens to us physically when we're singing, and what happens to us emotionally and mentally when we're singing, and also the cognitive effect of singing. So Gren's session was really great for us to think about what we do and why we do it. So one of the first things we're thinking about is the musculature throughout our bodies and keeping it functioning as we get older. Right from the age of 10 onwards, we have to think about and adapt to things, don't we, as we change, as we get older. So if we think about the physiology of breathing, for example, Gren talked about, he said you need to take a breath and then you long note, you're singing long notes. Some practitioners that you may have encountered avoid using the word breath, but they'll say sip in air or something like that. Would you like to do that? Sip in, I tell you what, you've got a big bowl of spaghetti in front of you. You identify one strand and you sip it up right down to the base of your belly. Okay, so here you go. So that immediately, I can see everybody, nobody's using this sort of suprothoracic region of their chest. They're using the lower regions of their chest, abdominal muscles, the diaphragmatic muscles that control the space that your lungs need to breathe in and out. So that's the type of exercise that we would do. Hopefully by stealth, people are expanding the intercostal muscles and the muscles that we use for breath. A study that we were involved with, Gren and myself and Matt actually, was looking at singing in people with COPD, with chronic respiratory ill health. And to our surprise, actually, Gren, wasn't it, that we found that one element of the peak flow meter that you probably know about, people breathe into, improved. We weren't expecting an improvement. We would have been pleased with the sort of maintenance of effect. But FEV1, as it's called, actually improved over the 6 months that people were involved with 3 months of singing and then looking at what was happening after that. So it doesn't seem as though it should have been really possible because people had damaged lungs, but they were clearly using them differently, and they also reported that they felt better, they had more energy, more breath as they were going about their daily lives. So that's one thing that then we started thinking, okay, what we need is a goals framework for our practitioners to work with. We need something that could be flexible enough to accommodate all of our backgrounds and where we come from, and our approaches, our styles of delivery, and the material that we use. But if we have one set of goals that aim to address all of those things, physical, mental, neurological, cognitive, social, and then the practitioners could refer to them and just have a look to see if their daily practice, their sessions are addressing each of these activities, and maybe the following week they might want to do a little bit more on social connections or whatever it is. They can just monitor what they're doing. So I'm just thinking about, Gwen, just remind me what you did to start with. Yeah, okay. So we hope that everybody just thinks, this is nice, we're having fun, we can do this. But actually there's so much more going on inside, in the brain and in our bodies, when we're just doing simple tapping. And certainly when we're crossing the median line, as we say, you probably all know that the right side of the brain controls left-hand movement. That was the wrong way around, wasn't it? And the opposite. So people who have had difficulties with one side, one hemisphere, often given activities that cross the median line, so people with stroke, for example. So that simple activity, if we could have a look and see what's going on in our brains when we're crossing the median line, that way, and also when we're singing at the same time, our practitioners would be looking at what we're doing vocally. We are using the vocal apparatus, we're exercising the little tiny weeny muscles that are around the larynx, around the pharynx, this sort of whole area here. The root of the tongue, which is very important for swallow as we get older. Quite a lot of older people have something called bulbar palsy, which just delays swallow a little bit. The lovely exercise Gwen did with raising your eyebrows. If you just do that now, raise your eyebrows and flare your nostrils, and think about your palate at the back of your throat, the roof of your mouth. It actually raises the palate. Just making that shape raises the palate. And Tam is here. Tam's the most phenomenal singer. She's beautiful. And so singers know quite a lot about the anatomy of singing and using the voice. And it's wonderful to compare the exercises that singers might do to the exercises that we, for Singing for Health, do. So we're trying to protect the voice, the little tiny vocal folds, which have the tiniest muscles in the body that make them work. And we're trying also to help people maintain the sounds that they can produce and maybe extend them a little bit. Did we make, yes, we made woof sounds. Did we? Oh, laugh. Oh, 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 oh. If you just do that and you can put your hands on your belly, you can really feel the diaphragm, the belly, the muscles, all these sort of abductor muscles moving around. So the whole torso is involved in that. And of course, when you're asked to do something like that, you're taking an in-breath. So you're inhaling. The long notes, the lovely long notes, we know that exhaling stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. And there are two, aren't there? The sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is more connected with fight or flight, so it's really important for us. But sometimes people with long-term conditions, health conditions, have problems turning that off. And certainly people with anxiety and emotional problems are just in that zone all of the time. It's not how many disciplines use deep breathing to relax us. You know, if we're feeling a bit stressed, it happens naturally, doesn't it? But that in itself, exhalation switches on the parasympathetic nervous system, which is to do with relaxation and recuperation. So we really do need to see if we can balance that. So the long note. We've got switching off the sympathetic nervous system. We've got using the throat. The R will change the shape. The shape of the larynx will be a certain way. If we raise the pitch, it changes, it stretches. We're also using parts of the brain, that are involved with language. So that's Wernicke's area and Broca's area on the left side of the brain. One for understanding language and the other for speaking language. All this could be seen on an fMRI scan if we were in it when we were doing that little, and also if we were doing this as well. That would trigger the somatic and the motor cortices. So there's masses going on. New music, if we're learning new music, we're obviously stimulating the frontal part of the brain here, the frontal lobe. And also if we sang a tune that was completely new to us, that was completely novel to us, it wouldn't really be recognised as a tune because we have we have a set of rules, don't we, in our culture, in the Western culture, that makes a tune. We kind of sang Bonnie Bonnie, we got it really quickly because we knew it was going to end up on the tonic. We knew roughly where it was going, and Belle Mama, those sorts of things. So that's music that we know, and we do know that if we engage in music that we know, it stimulates more dopamine, which is a good thing, and certainly dopamine for people who have Parkinson's. There aren't any studies with people with Parkinson's as yet, so we don't know whether the damage that occurs to stop the dopamine being produced will inhibit that or limit it. But we certainly know that for you and I, people who have good dopamine secretions, then singing music that we know, or in the style of music that we know, will stimulate dopamine alongside, if we're having fun, cortisol, if we're having fun, if we're working towards a performance, and if we're scared, or if we're worried that everybody else is getting it and we're not, if it causes anxiety, it will raise cortisol, so it will have an effect on cortisol. Also oxytocin, my favourite hormone of all, because it's associated with loving and bonding and social connections and new learning as well. So that's a bit of a win-win. Alongside serotonin, which is another mood hormone. So there's an awful lot going on in our brains, downstream, physical, social, mental, emotional, and cognitive. And I think it's quite a strong argument, isn't it, for singing together. I think it is a strong argument for singing together. Notwithstanding, there are seriously some people that don't like singing. So they would prefer to sit on the beach with their mate doing fishing or something like that Nick referred to this morning. And they probably have a similar sort of picture, brain picture, when they're doing that and they're feeling good. But I think there is a strong argument for singing. Do you not? Yes. Would you agree with me? Yes. Would you agree with me?
Yes.
Yes. 100%. Thank you.
So we're talking about research, and I guess that sometimes shades into evaluation. I'll just maybe say a bit about why we do both. Evaluation, I guess, we do to establish whether the thing that we think is worth doing is actually having the impact we think it's going to have. So we want to be able to measure it. Research is more at the end of like maybe developing a theory about why something would work and producing the evidence that we want to pass on to decision makers, who are probably people with a checkbook, in order to persuade them or convince them that something ought to be supported and funds ought to be made available to do this thing. So, and then there's also just the pure generation of new knowledge. You know, that's another reason we do research, just to find out, because we're curious beasts and we want to understand how things work. So I just wanted to say a little bit about, reflecting on what Trish was saying about layers and the way that we understand the world, the ways in which we understand the world. And because we can't do any research or evaluation unless we make meaning. So I wanted to just say a bit about the process of making meaning. And if you talk to a physicist about the bottom layer, the smallest layer of which we begin to understand the world, meaning doesn't really have much to say about. It doesn't really have much of a function at the level of fields and particles and elementary forces. These things interact, but the concept of meaning doesn't operate at that level. So we come up a level, And that's perhaps the level at which we exist, the macro world that we all live in. And again, for an individual, although the individual is the focus of medicine, for example, we're talking quite a lot about medical processes, an individual in isolation is bereft of meaning as well. It's only once you get to the level of communication, as Grenville so ably demonstrated, parent-child or within a group or whatever, that meaning begins to emerge. So it's an emergent feature. If we're trying to persuade people, policymakers, people with checkbooks, hi Adam, that a certain course of action is preferable to another, then we need to be working at that intersubjective, interhuman level where meaning emerges. So I have a great deal of respect for the work that is done at the biophysical level that Trish has been talking about, but I'm also interested in the level at which humans interact, the sort of, if you like, the social sciences level, and things like the generation of social capital, which we know happens when you intersect using creative processes. So I've worked with, Trish has very generously supported my consultancy business over the years, and we've worked together also with Matt on an AHRC funded project that's looked at the kinds of processes that are unfolding when we do arts-led regeneration in coastal towns, for example. And we've looked at different theories of social interaction and how they unfold. The role of music obviously fits in alongside other art forms, but actually once you go up that level to social interactions, then the art form itself kind of drops away a little bit, and you see more in common between art forms than you see than in terms of the differences. So, I mean, a friend of mine, by the way, is synesthetic. So when he sees a Mark Rothko painting, he hears Sibelius. And that makes me think, actually, you know, I'm really interested in that there's a lot of intersection. Oh, and when we go back to the cave that we were talking about earlier, or Lascaux, you know, where early societies would get together, early kind of groups of humans would get together, you probably couldn't separate out the rhythm, the making of sound, from the light, the flaring of the lights on the walls, and the paint that you mentioned, the blowing and the tactile elements. So all the different senses are blurred together in that picture, I think. And it's the social interaction that emerges at the upper level where we generate meaning that's the most important phenomenon from the way I see it. After we did the AHRC project, Trish and I and other colleagues and Stephen Clift, who's not here today, led on a Wellcome Trust funded project to look at the big picture in terms of cultural engagement and well-being. So even there, we're moving away from the concept of health and into just what is a good life. You know, how do we improve our well-being through creative activities. And that led us really towards thinking, actually, you know, these art form constructs, whether they be dance or music or drama or literature, they're manifestations, or art, they're manifestations of a more general kind of thing, which we call creativity. And it's a fundamental human characteristic that's not well understood and not it's much studied, but not it's very elusive. So I'm now part of and I'll just wind up now. I'm now part of a research network which calls itself the Everyday Creativity Research Network, which is looking at the in all its rich manifestations, the phenomenon of everyday creativity, the type of creativity that we do, that we think helps us develop more fully as humans, maybe has elements of learning and development to it, connects us to other people, and allows us to immerse ourselves in some kind of process of flow. And we're just starting out on that journey with this network. And there's a mailing list which I will share around that everyone can join, and I'll make sure that's passed around later. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm here to just reiterate really. Why singing is good for us, and we experience that every day. And when you join the Monday group, you get your weekly doses of singing. So I'm on a mission, on the mission to put singing part of our healthcare programs really. So we did. I'm lucky enough to work with Trish and Grumble and Matt alongside for some years now, and we conducted international study on Parkinson's and singing. And but today I'm going to introduce you as what we did during the pandemic, during the first lockdown. So that's when we started doing some online singing, which nobody knew before. And we are collecting data from Monday Music members before the pandemic happened, and we carried that data collection during the pandemic. And so from this research activity, we were able to show that actually this even online singing made differences to our members. Oh, here it is, my PowerPoint. Okay, next, please. Big thanks to Canterbury Cantata Trust, Monday Music, and which Grumble led, and also Trish, Music for Wellbeing, and I'm based at the University of Derby. So next, please. I must also add here that I've done this presentation twice before today. So once I was invited to go to Oxford International Wellbeing Conference, where I talked about this benefit of group singing, specifically the Monday group style singing. So, this isn't sit down with a book with music, but it's singing from your memory, just learning on the spot. It's open to everybody. It's a communal group singing. And also the second conference was in South Korea, which was an international conference. I also talked about specifically the group singing benefit for older adults. Okay, next please. I won't go into a lot about this, so next please. Next, please. So, as I mentioned a little bit before, we wanted to compare our data from before the pandemic period and the data from the during the pandemic, the first lockdown period. And we measured three things. So we looked at the overall health of our Monday singers. And second, we'll ask them about how they felt in terms of loneliness, whether they felt lonely, whether they felt isolated, whether they felt more connected with others. And the third part was we asked them to tell us in their own words what they experienced from being part of the Monday group. Next, please. So as I mentioned, we use some already available well-regarded health surveys, and during the pandemic period, we asked them to do it through online system as well. Next, please. Around between 60 and 70 people responded to our data collection call. So, and they are, it's a bit boring details, but not usually over 70 years old and old adults living in Folkestone or Canterbury in this area. So next, please. Next, please. So this graph shows our participants' health before the pandemic and during the pandemic. And there are not a lot of differences there. So next, please. But this is the question, one question we ask, how would you rate your health today out of 100? 1 being the worst imaginable you can imagine, and 100 being the best. And as you can see, before pandemic, lots of people felt actually their health was pretty good, but during the pandemic, their perception of their own health was much worse than before the pandemic. So the orange bar shows during the pandemic data. Next, please. This is a loneliness scale. So, as we all experienced, the first UK lockdown, like most of us did, our Monday singers felt a lot more lonely compared with the before the pandemic. Next, please. So when we asked about, can you tell us in your own words about your experience of being part of the Monday Music Group, our members told us these many beautiful comments, and from those a lot of different comments we were able to draw some specific common themes in their comments. And as we heard before from Granville, there were definitely those 6 sort of benefits that they experienced. Sense of well-being, that was the most prominent one. And interestingly, during the pandemic, people also felt actually joining a Monday group online nullified the lockdown effect. So that was amazing comment that we saw in our data. Also, it wasn't an extraordinary circumstances. Nobody knew but Monday Music, that having a regular meeting through online gave them, purpose, meaning, and facilitated that, some social contact. Even though it was limited, it wasn't ideal. Okay, next, please. That's okay. There's some I put up there some to give you the direct quotes. There's lots about, having physical benefits, breathing, in terms of breathing. Next, please. Oh, this is from the pandemic period, so it's a lot more interesting, I think. Yeah, as I mentioned, it provided routine and structure, and also facilitate those important social connection. And online wasn't really ideal, wasn't the same as meeting people in person and singing together in a room, but that was still something. And for some people, actually online singing nullified the effects of lockdown. Next, please. Yeah, so I'm just coming to the end. I've started a campaign, song a day keeps the doctor away. So I think we mentioned that in the book as well. So, I mean, you are doing that as well for yourself now. So now we have to just take it to our schools, to our community, to our neighborhood, to our friends. Yeah. So, yeah, join the campaign. And yeah, as I said, I'm working on making singing part of Parkinson's rehabilitation programs or mental health programs for for everybody in the UK. So yeah, that's me. That's was that?
Questions for the panel?
Before we ask the benefits of singing good singing, so good music, but in this sort of overall question of creativity, being in a competitive field in a sense, there are people saying, I should go bike riding, from a bike riding group, I should eat these things. There's also people who would definitely make me better. Is there any way of evaluating evidence that singing is particularly good? And so I'm better going singing than I am better running up and down the beats. Or is there some also, rather than focusing on singing, some general theme of culture makes life better, or routine communal structures help make life better? And is there any way of getting into the path of being that sort of holding together, rather than separate interest groups putting their bits in and competing against each other?
I'm probably not the best person to ask the question about the specific benefits of singing to, but I would say that there is evidence to show that it's very important that the individual gets to make a choice about the activity, and that although that's complex and nuanced, because we've all had the experience as well of taking somebody along against their will to something and forcing them to do it. And that's the point at which they think, oh, actually, I really enjoyed that, and I'm going to keep going. So you have to, in some circumstances, help people across a hump. It's taken me, 6 decades to realise I quite enjoy cooking. So I think, creativity is a multifaceted, complex phenomenon. It means different things to different people. And it's really hard to make hard and fast rules about how it should operate. What I'd like to see a world where people were relaxed about whether cycling could be creative, or whether going for a walk in nature was inherently creative, and whether and whether these things could be valued alongside singing and other art forms. I think it's just, but we live in a pretty structured and siloed and hierarchical society where concepts like excellence are very important, and talent. And we see on our TV played out, through the pandemic, there's a lot of programs that talk about talent and uncovering hidden talents and people maybe rising to the top in a way that's fundamentally part of the economic system that we operate in, where money and professionalism are at the heart of it. But alongside that, we also see Grace and Perry's art club, where money's really not part of the story here at all. What he's looking for is authenticity and people talking about deep things that matter to them, that have meaning to them, and expressing it through whatever, as it happens, he uses the visual arts, but it could easily be other art forms as well. But I don't know.
No, I think so. There are some studies that compare activities. I'm not sure myself how helpful that is because, as you say, very rightly, I think people have different tastes and desires. So I'm not sure how helpful it. And it's a bit ambiguous anyway. The findings sometimes say yes, the singing group preferred this or that, but not that bit. And so it's not. There's no sort of definitive answer to that. And I think that we have to think about people doing things that they enjoy, exactly what Nick is saying, that there's the Natural Voice Network, which a lot of us will be members of, has sent their newsletter, and one of the members, who they're all music practitioners, was just trying to define what it is about singing together that makes it good. And she said, the thing that really resonated with me was one of these practitioners said, it's being in a space and watching somebody else do something that I totally get, that resonates with me in terms of my deep well-being, a sense of well-being. And that could apply to anything, couldn't it, really? So I think that's right with culture in its entirety. So yes, that's that.
You go. I like to. Thanks for the question. I think it's a very, very good question. But let's think about what do you want to achieve here? Do you want to achieve better lung function? Then there are other exercises, you could also do to increase or to, maintain your lung function. But I do think, or I believe, singing is though superior than other activities because you could do 100 push-ups for your health, but if you do sing, without you realizing it, actually your body is doing exactly the same as doing 100 push-ups. Yeah, your lungs working. Or making most of the capacity while you're singing, especially if you sing out loud. While singing is such a holistic activity and it engages your body and mind. And while you're walking, you can also add singing. You can sing and walk. Then you may have more enjoyment. You may find it enhances the walking activity too. And so it's, with our Parkinson's project, we are looking at doing drumming exercises, the benefits of drumming exercise for people with Parkinson's. But if you add singing to that, it brings you much more joy. And while you can sing out loud as you're drumming, so therefore you will be doing the drumming exercise even more regularly because you had much fun. And through songs you can also express. So singing adds a lot to that. So I believe, singing is actually superior than other activities. And one study, if I may, I'd like to mention, singing was compared to creative writing and craft. And, they were looking for the social bonding effect. And in this study, they found that, guess what? Actually, group singing with other people, they had a much faster and stronger effect on social bonding compared with these creative writing and craft making activities. So, and that brings us back to we are hardwired to sing. You want to add something?
Yeah, I just say, I think that the great danger is actually sort of thinking about a sort of hierarchy of artistic engagement, as Nick said. But I do also think that we can learn significantly from past cultures and the working class engagement with singing. So I'm brought to mind my own experience, as I said, of the working class chapel, of being a release from the privations of a society that certainly I grew up in, which was really tough. Okay, so we were able to escape from that. At the same time, that was paralleled by miners coming out of the ground, both in Wales and in East Kent, in fact, and choosing on 2 occasions each week to actually engage in singing as an activity, as opposed to cycling or anything that was actually more difficult. And maybe in terms of financial and economic possibility was not on the same spectrum, but singing was. So this is accessible. And the third thing is that there is Yoon's research that she did, not about singing, but not to do with anything that we talked about today, but in terms of your original research, you mentioned this very significant thing of actually pain reduction, being able to hold onto either the memory of non-pain or actually blocking it at that time. So back to my starting points about our evolutionary process. We've used that simple means of actually engaging with a world around us that's sometimes uncomfortable to use the use of sound as a block in those ways. So no hierarchy, but there is a gap we can fill easily.
But we do know dance researchers and dancers who say they have an advocacy bias towards their medium. So yeah.
That was a great session. Thank you to Nick, Trish, and you. So let's just have a round of applause for